year 1601, deep in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, a priest from the Eastern Orthodox Church stumbled across something utterly terrifying. When he made it back to his parish, he was able to tell the horrific details of what happened, deep in those mountains, having barely escaped with his own life. This is the story, as it was documented by his fellow priests over the centuries. It's been translated from Romanian to modern English. The priest who transcribed the story titled it, "The Pneuma I was tasked with going deep into the Carpathian Mountains to visit a dying member of the church to read them their last rites. It's a 3-day trek through the dark pine-covered mountains to reach the home I was tasked to visit. On my first night of being alone in the forest, I had the most utterly disturbing nightmare of my young adult life. I was trapped inside a small, dank and dirty house with a young, evil, vicious girl who had the devil's black eyes and nails as long as the bear's. The entire nightmare was her trying to kill me so she could consume me. I woke up sweating profusely, screaming out for help into the dark, cold night air. When I abruptly stopped screaming, I could hear the echo of my screams as they were carried down the dark, narrow pass, bouncing off the mountain sheer rock walls. A cold chill went up my spine as the dream seemed so real. The smells, sounds, and especially the fear. I was left with an empty feeling of dread as I tried going back to sleep. Something deep inside me was telling me to go back to the parish immediately. Unfortunately, because of my priestly duties, that was not something I could do, and because this was my first important task, I promised myself I was not going to fail. I decided to pray for strength and courage. As I laid there on the cold, hard ground, clutching my crucifix tightly, I repeated the oath I took when I became a priest over and over again. After repeating the oath countless times, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember was the warmth of the sun hitting my face. I jumped up, realizing I'd slept in and was behind schedule now. I quickly gathered what few things I carried with me, drank some water, had a few bites of bread, then started scurrying my way up through the mountain's narrow crevices. As I made my way through the narrow passes, my mind replayed the horrific dream I'd had, and as the day wore on, the more scared I became. The little girl's demonic face was burned in my mind as if it was a painting that had been hung above the fire mantle, sitting there staring at me when the sun started making its way behind the mountains. For the night, an unsettled feeling hit my gut, and I dreaded going to sleep again for fear of what awaited me in my dreams, or worse. I gathered some wood and started to make a fire to try and calm myself, but as I did, the hairs on my arms stood on end. No sooner had I got the fire going, I heard the hell of a wolf, not too far away, too close in fact, and I nearly jumped into the fire. As I turned all around looking to see if I could see the wolf's eyes shining off of the fire in the darkness, but I saw nothing. I knew I wasn't going to get much sleep that night. The demonic girl. My dreams was frightening, but it was only a dream. The wolf was an immediate, real threat. I continued gathering as much wood as I could, so I could keep the fire going all night. Once the fire was going strong and I had enough wood, I laid down to rest for a moment. I was exhausted from walking through the mountains all day, and not to mention mentally taxed from fear again. I drifted off to sleep and once again had another horrific dream. This time, I was back at my parish in the church, kneeling down in front of the statue of Christ upon the cross. As I was saying my prayers, I happened to look up. I could see blood starting to trickle out of the eyes of Christ. Streams of blood increased until the statue of Christ was completely covered in blood. Music. I stood up from the hassock with an utter look of horror on my face. As I started backing away from the statue, it suddenly turned into the demonic girl that had been in my dreams. The previous night, she leapt down from the cross, running towards me, her arms and claws stretched out as she ran. She had the most hideous scream as she ran towards me, her eyes black as charcoal. I stood there, frozen to the floor with fear, unable to move. As she got close, she pounced on me, which sent me flying backwards, hitting the ground. Suddenly, I was startled awake, screaming again. I immediately knelt down, grabbed my crucifix, and started praying to God to stop these nightmares from happening. I felt I was losing my mind. I cursed myself for falling asleep, having to remember there was a wolf nearby last night, and how lucky I was it didn't come at me while I slept. I quickly gathered my things and took off. This was the third day, the day I was supposed to make it to the ill person's house. If I hurried, I'd make it before nightfall. I wasn't keen on spending another night outside in the mountains. I remember well as I walked through the forest. The sense of dread I'd felt yesterday seemed to get worse. I tried praying or thinking of other things, but the demonic girl's face was burned in my mind no matter what I did. I kept seeing her horrific face, those lifeless black eyes as I walked along. The cold, empty forest time seemed to stand still. It was eerily quiet. The silence was deafening the previous days. I'd heard small animals running around or chirping, but today I heard nothing. The further I walked, the sense of dread got worse. Something inside me was telling me to turn around and go back to the parish, however I was too stubborn to listen to my instincts. I remember walking around a corner of some big boulders when I suddenly stopped in my tracks. There before me stood an old stone sculpture of what appeared to be a man's sculpture. Was old and decaying. The man's mouth was open, as if he had been screaming in agony. There appeared to be a set of small horns protruding from the top of his forehead. I moved in closer, and I was horrified to see that his lower abdomen had been ripped open and his entrails were coming out upon him. That was enough for me. I was about to turn around and run back the way I came when something suddenly leaped onto my back from the trees above. I hit the ground hard face first. As I screamed out in pain, whatever it was began ripping through my cassock. It had the most hideous smell, enough to almost make me vomit. I tried as best I could to stand up or at least move, but the thing on top of me was strong and powerful. Every time I struggled, it hit me back down into the cold, hard ground. It was then the thought entered my mind: I'm going to die. I quickly began praying and reading myself my last rites. If this is God's will, then so be it. I conceded to myself. It wasn't long before it was tearing into my flesh. I screamed like I'd never screamed before. I could feel its claws tearing and its teeth taking bites of my flesh. I decided to close my eyes and give up when I heard a faint swish noise, then immediately followed by a thwap. Whatever it was that had been attacking me bellowed out in pain, then fell back onto the ground between my legs. I was in so much pain and had lost so much blood. I was drifting in and out of consciousness before I passed out. I remember seeing a person's legs walking towards me with brown cavalier boots on. The person knelt down beside me and spoke to me in a language I'd never heard before. Then I blacked out when I came to and opened my eyes. There next to me was the demonic little girl from my dreams, her eyes wide open, staring at me. I yelled out and tried to move away, but I was in too much pain. I heard movement behind me, and a person spoke to me in broken Romanian. I'll never forget word for word what he said: "As long as I live, you lucky to live. This girl possessed by evil spirits, Samka." I tracked girl for a long time, many years from Slovenia. You get better in few days, you rest. Now over the next few days, the long, red-bearded, emotionless gentleman who saved my life tended to my wounds, fed and watered me. He told me how the girl was actually his daughter, and how she'd killed his entire family when he was away on a hunting trip to get me for the winter. He said he came home to find his entire family butchered, and the name Sanka was written in blood all over the walls. He said it wasn't difficult tracking her, as she'd left carnage everywhere she went. The hard part was catching up to her. He said he'd got glimpses of her the day before she attacked me. I asked him if the statue meant anything. He said in one of the cities he went through, as he was tracking her down, he'd met an old historian who specialized in ancient demons. They began talking, and the historian knew the name Samka. He said Samka was an evil spirit with one purpose: to possess the body of a human and kill as many people as it could. Samka is also an eater of people, preferring the meat of humans. The statue, he said, was someone who Samka had previously possessed and was trying to get back to it for some reason unknown to him before. I departed on my journey back to home. I asked him what he would do with himself. Now he said he'd been tracking the possessed body of his daughter for so many years. He wasn't sure what he'd do now. His last words to me were, "Keep traveling, no family." Now I turned around and started to make my way down the mountain. After a few minutes of walking, I turned around to look at him one last time, and he was no longer there. During the 3-day trek home, many thoughts came and went through my mind. One thought that stuck with me and always will was that pure evil does exist, and I must be prepared for it the next time I encounter it. For more scary stories, please